Chicago, 2043. They call it the Windy City, but they should call it the Wired City. Every lamppost a surveillance node, every storefront a data vacuum. Privacy's a ghost story we tell the kids, a relic of a bygone era, like rotary phones and paper maps. My workshop is a time capsule, though not by design, more like by default. It's a cramped, cluttered space on the ground floor of a building that's seen better centuries, let alone decades, nestled in a neighborhood the city planners conveniently forget when they're not gentrifying it. Dust motes dance in the weak light filtering through the grimy windows, illuminating a chaotic ballet of discarded electronics, half-finished projects, and tools inherited from my father. He was a watchmaker, a craftsman of a different era. He believed in the tangible, the intricate dance of gears and springs, not this ephemeral world of ones and zeros. I inherited his hands, his meticulous nature, but not his Luddite tendencies. My father saw time as a linear thing, a river flowing in one direction. It took me years and a whole lot of discarded inventions to prove to myself that he was wrong. That's what this is all about in the end, proving him wrong about a great many things. I trace the faded inscription on a worn brass compass, one of his prized possessions, now a paperweight amongst the chaos. Time is the fire in which we burn. He meant it as a warning, a reminder of mortality. But what if the fire could be banked, redirected? What if time wasn't a river, but a vast uncharted ocean? Those are the questions that keep me up at night, fueled by lukewarm instant coffee, and the hope that I'm not just a washed-up inventor chasing ghosts in the static. This is one thing I didn't inherit from him, his fear of progress, or rather, what everyone else defined as progress. The news drones on from an old salvaged CRT television in the corner, a talking head spouting the usual platitudes about economic recovery and technological advancement. They talk about a bright future, but all I see is a world drowning in its own data, where algorithms dictate everything from stock prices to social interactions. Tonight, they're particularly excited about Project Argus, the government's latest foray into predictive policing, using AI to forecast criminal activity. Another nail in the coffin of free will, if you ask me. Another step toward a perfectly ordered, perfectly controlled society. It was a different kind of prediction that set all this in motion. A different kind of signal. It wasn't some grand plan, some carefully orchestrated scheme to change the world. Just dumb luck, really. A few years back, after my father passed and left me with nothing but a mountain of debt and a legacy of unfulfilled potential, I was working on a signal booster, a device to amplify weak radio signals, mostly for hobbyists and vintage radio enthusiasts. It was a niche market, barely enough to keep the lights on, but it was honest work. Then, while tinkering with the frequency range, I stumbled upon something unusual. A hidden band, a no-man's land of static and whispers tucked away between the regulated frequencies. At first I dismissed it as interference, a stray signal from some newfangled communication system, but it persisted, a consistent anomaly that defied explanation. Driven by a blend of curiosity and desperation, the same cocktail that fueled most of my failed ventures, I became obsessed. I built a new prototype, a more sensitive receiver, using salvaged parts and a custom-designed antenna. The core of the device was a unique crystal oscillator, scavenged from an old Soviet-era radio I found at a flea market. There was something peculiar about its structure, its resonance. I still don't fully understand it, but it was the key. The workshop became my laboratory, my sanctuary, my prison. Then one night everything changed. The static cleared, just for a moment, and a voice, garbled but intelligible, broke through. A woman's voice reading a news report. It was mundane stuff, a minor fire in a downtown building, a traffic accident on the interstate. Nothing remarkable except for one detail. The date. It was a week in the future. My blood ran cold. The event was insignificant. A small fire quickly contained in an office building on Wacker Drive. I dismissed it as a coincidence, a bizarre prank, a glitch in the matrix. But deep down, a seed of doubt, or perhaps hope, had been planted. The inventor in me couldn't help but latch on to a new obsession. The following week, I watched the news with a sickening mix of anticipation and dread. And there it was. The fire, just as described in the broadcast, down to the smallest detail. The same building, the same time, the same cause. It was a minor incident, barely a footnote in the day's news cycle. But for me, it was a cataclysmic event. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't a failure. Proof that the impossible was, in fact, possible. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to stop, to dismantle the machine, to forget I ever saw anything. But the other part, the part that had been dormant for so long, the part that yearned for discovery, for validation, had awakened. I was hooked. It was like a drug, this glimpse into the future, a forbidden fruit I couldn't resist. And for what? So I could win the lottery, warn people of impending disasters. It all seemed so pedestrian, and it felt wrong somehow, like cheating. It started with small things, local news mostly. Then I began tuning into financial broadcasts, stock market predictions. I made a little money, enough to pay off some debts, but I avoided major trades, anything that might attract unwanted attention. I reasoned that since I was using publicly available information, that I simply received it before anyone else, I wasn't breaking any laws. Validation. That's what I told myself I wanted. A chance to prove all the doubters wrong. To show them that Henry Svensson wasn't just a has-been tinkering in a dilapidated workshop. The Midwest Tech Symposium, a small independent conference held annually, seemed like the perfect venue. It was a gathering of fringe scientists, inventors, and tech enthusiasts. My people. I envisioned a captivated audience, a flurry of questions, maybe even a lucrative offer or two. It was a pathetic fantasy, fueled by years of rejection and a desperate need to reclaim some semblance of my former self. The presentation was a disaster of epic proportions. The Tomorrow Machine looked more like a prop from a low-budget sci-fi flick than a groundbreaking invention. My explanation of its workings, a delicate dance between quantum entanglement and temporal mechanics, was met with blank stares and derisive snickers. The demonstration, a live reception of a news broadcast from the following day, was dismissed as a pre-recorded hoax. Radio waves from the future? Get a load of this guy, one attendee scoffed, loud enough for the entire room to hear. The laughter that followed was a physical blow, each chuckle a hammer striking a nail in the coffin of my aspirations. I left the conference humiliated, the Tomorrow Machine feeling heavier than ever, a burden of failure dragging me down. But the debacle, it turned out, had unintended consequences. It caught the attention of someone other than the tech bros and wannabe inventors. Within days, I started noticing things. It began with an unmarked black sedan parked across the street for a few hours, a detail easily dismissed in a city like this. But then it happened again. A different car, but the same tinted windows, the same air of quiet observation. And it wasn't just the cars. The static on my phone line, always a minor annoyance, intensified. There was also a new, more sophisticated form of interference. Subtle manipulations of my online activity, emails disappearing from my inbox. Search results oddly skewed, as if someone was deliberately curating my digital world. It was the work of professionals, no doubt about it. A few days later came the knock on the door. Not a forceful battering, but a precise, almost polite series of raps that somehow conveyed an air of undeniable authority. They introduced themselves as agents from the Office of Future Technologies, a name so ludicrously on the nose it would have been comical if it weren't so terrifying. The director, a man known simply as Mr. Muller, did most of the talking. He was a study in understated power, his suit impeccably tailored, his demeanor calm, almost friendly, but his eyes betrayed a ruthless intellect. They knew all about the Tomorrow Machine, of course. They had questions, demands, veiled threats disguised as polite inquiries. They wanted the machine, and they wanted my cooperation. They offered me a deal, a chance to work for them, to develop the technology under their supervision, with resources I could only dream of. "Imagine what you could achieve with our backing," Mr. Muller purred. "A chance to truly change the world." It was the same carrot that had been dangled in front of me before. The promise of recognition, of resources, of a chance to make a real difference. But this time, the stick was much bigger and a lot sharper. They made it clear that refusal wasn't an option, that my invention was now a matter of national security, and that they wouldn't hesitate to use any means necessary to acquire it. The encounter left me shaken, trapped in a web of my own making. I went underground, or as underground as one can go in a city that sees and hears everything. I abandoned my workshop, my home, everything that connected me to my former life. I moved from one temporary safe house to another, abandoned warehouses, basements, the hidden spaces of the city that exist outside the surveillance panopticon. I relied on my knowledge of Chicago's underbelly, the corners and back alleys I knew from my years of scavenging parts and exploring the city's decaying infrastructure. I was a ghost, a digital phantom, erasing my tracks as I went. I changed my appearance, cut my hair, grew a beard, adopted a new name, a meaningless alias that felt as artificial as the digital constructs that dominated this new world. It was during this period of forced exile that I encountered the others. Not a formal organization, but a loose network of individuals, each with their own reasons for existing on the fringes. Hackers, dissident scientists, whistleblowers, and a few ordinary citizens who had simply seen too much or asked too many questions. They were the digital outcasts, the ones who refused to conform, the resistors in a society that demanded absolute obedience. They knew about the tomorrow machine, or at least about the rumors of a device that could predict the future. They saw me as a potential ally, a symbol of defiance against the encroaching surveillance state. One of them, a man named Nelson, a former military communications expert, became a reluctant mentor. He had seen things in his service, things that had made him question the very nature of authority and the supposed sanctity of technological progress. He understood the potential dangers of the tomorrow machine, its military applications, its ability to be weaponized. "They want to control the future, Henry," he'd say, his voice raspy from years of cheap whiskey and cheaper cigarettes. "But the future ain't something you can put in a box. It's a wild animal, and if you try to cage it, it'll tear you apart." He recognized the patterns in the broadcast that I showed him, a series of seemingly unrelated events that, when viewed together, painted a chilling picture. "That's a cascade, son," he explained, tapping a gnarled finger on a printout of the data. "A chain reaction. Each event triggers the next, building towards something big, something bad." He suspected, and I soon came to agree, that these weren't just predictions, but echoes of a future timeline already set in motion. A timeline we were inadvertently solidifying with each use of the tomorrow machine. The big, bad event became our shared obsession. A catastrophic prediction buried deep within the static, a chaotic broadcast that hinted at widespread destruction, societal collapse, an event that could potentially reshape the world as we knew it. It was vague, shrouded in static and coded language, but the urgency, the sheer terror in the voice of the broadcaster was unmistakable. We had to stop it. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone. The irony wasn't lost on me. I, Henry Svensson, the failed inventor, the outcast, was now tasked with saving the world from a future of my own making, a future that I was actively helping to create. We decided to use the machine sparingly, strategically, to gather more information about the predicted event. Our hope was to identify the root cause, the trigger that set off the cascade, and find a way to prevent it without causing further distortions. Each time I activated the tomorrow machine, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders, the chilling awareness that I was playing with forces I barely understood. We were fighting a losing battle, a desperate rearguard action against a future that seemed to be hurtling towards us, propelled by the very device I held in my hands. We needed to find a way to rewrite the future before it was set in stone. But how do you change a future you're also creating? This was the question that haunted me, that kept me up at night. The question that made the hum of the city feel less like a lullaby and more like a death knell. The breakthrough came, as they often do, not with a bang but a whimper. Not in a flash of insight, but in a weary sigh of recognition. While poring over the machine's schematics for the 100th time, tracing the path of the energy flow, I saw a subtle anomaly, a feedback loop I had previously overlooked. It wasn't just the crystal oscillator that was generating the unusual energy signature. It was the entire circuit, the way the components interacted, the way the signal was being processed. The Tomorrow machine, I realized, was not merely a receiver, it was a transceiver, a two-way street. The act of observing the future wasn't passive. We weren't just listening to the echoes of tomorrow. We were sending out ripples that were shaping that very future. Each broadcast we received, each prediction we analyzed, was strengthening the probability of that event occurring, solidifying that particular timeline. The crystal oscillator, with its unique resonant properties, was the heart of the problem. It wasn't just amplifying the future signal, it was also emitting a low-frequency energy signature, a kind of temporal echo that was subtly influencing events in the present, nudging them towards the predicted outcome. The machine was creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, a closed loop where the future we observed was the future we were creating. It was the observer effect on a grand, terrifying scale, where the simple act of knowing the future was making it inevitable. And it was all my fault. This realization shattered me. I saw, with horrifying clarity, the chain reaction we had set in motion, the cascade of events leading to the predicted catastrophe. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, knowing that I was the one who had laid the tracks. The only option left was to disable the machine, permanently, and to do it in a way that would neutralize its reality-altering effects. But how do you dismantle a device whose very existence bends the rules of time and causality? The answer, when it came, was both simple and terrifying. We needed to overload the crystal oscillator to create a localized temporal distortion, a kind of controlled implosion that would erase the machine's influence, reset the timeline, or at least that was the theory. The confrontation with the OFT was inevitable. They had tracked us to an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of the city, a relic of Chicago's manufacturing past, a fitting location for the final act of this technological tragedy. The director, Mr. Mueller, was there, of course, his entourage of faceless agents surrounding him. He made one last attempt to reason with me, to appeal to my sense of duty, of self-preservation. "We can control this, Svensson," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "We can use the machine to secure our future, to protect our nation." But his words were devoid of conviction. He knew as I did that there was no controlling this power. Not anymore. I had rigged the Tomorrow machine to overload. It was a delicate process, a precise sequence of adjustments that would push the crystal oscillator beyond its limits, creating a surge of energy that would, hopefully, neutralize its temporal effects. The machine hummed ominously, its vibrations shaking the concrete floor. I could see the fear in the agent's eyes, the uncertainty in the director's steely gaze. They knew something was different, that the game had changed. This was no longer about acquiring a device, it was about containing a force of nature. It was about survival. As the machine reached critical mass, I initiated the final sequence. A blinding flash of light engulfed the room, followed by a deafening roar. I felt a strange sensation, a feeling of being stretched and compressed simultaneously, as if the fabric of reality was warping around me. Then, silence. An eerie, absolute silence that was more unsettling than any noise. The OFT agents were gone, vanished. The director too. The industrial complex itself was altered as if it had been partially erased from existence, replaced with a slightly different version of itself. It was as if the events of the past few weeks had been undone, excised from the timeline. The tomorrow machine was inert, a pile of lifeless metal and wires. The crystal oscillator was shattered, its unique resonance forever silenced. I stumbled out of the altered complex into a world that felt both familiar and foreign. The city skyline was the same, yet different. The news on the radio spoke of events I didn't recognize, faces I had never seen. The catastrophic prediction, the one that had haunted our every waking moment, had not come to pass. There was no mention of the OFT, no trace of the events I had lived through. It was as if none of it had ever happened, as if I were the only one who remembered. Life went on. I'm a different man now, haunted by the memories of a future that never was, a future I both witnessed and erased. I work with my hands again, fixing things, tangible things, a meager attempt to atone for my past hubris. Sometimes, late at night, when the city hums its lullaby of data and surveillance, I think I hear it, a whisper in the static, a ghost of a signal from a timeline that no longer exists, a reminder of the power I once wielded, the bullet I dodged, the world I saved, and the world I lost. Or perhaps it is just my imagination. One day, months later, while visiting my father's grave, I saw him, Mr. Mueller. Older, wearier, but undoubtedly him. He was tending to a nearby grave. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I saw a hint of recognition in his gaze, a hint of shared memory. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. He turned away, disappearing into the rows of headstones, leaving me alone with my ghosts, my doubts, and the chilling realization that the silence of eternity might not be so silent after all, and perhaps the echoes of tomorrow are not so easily silenced. The future, after all, has a way of catching up, one way or another. The fire, as my father used to say, always finds a way to burn. Only this time, I wasn't sure if it was a fire of destruction or of renewal. Only time, that fickle, elusive mistress, would tell. But I knew one thing for sure. I would never again dare to listen to its secrets. Some doors, once opened, can never be truly closed. Some knowledge, once gained, can never be truly forgotten. And some silences are best left undisturbed.